So, continuing my silly little rant about fantasy and firearms, I've been thinking about how much gunpowder introduction with cannons, with guns and muskets and all that changed the way we fight and changed the way modern warfare is, even from the early stages where knights were using hand cannons that were crude devices that barely could aim to continuing to advance into modern age. Each step and each evolution of firearms, handheld or like cannons and bombardiers, and of course developments of bombs as well, changed how we approach warfare. But when, for example, fantasy storytellers and world builders create more complex magical systems, often they forgot to account this and try to keep the, again, really poorly understood form of medieval combat that is like bunch of people with swords charging at each other and hacking each other up, which is of course comical. So just them presenting medieval combat as just random violence with swords and nothing else creates the level of quality that you wouldn't expect any more thought to it. But if you want to be more intellectual and think through our world building and create more interesting forms of magic and medieval age connection, we can actually go back and look at how actual medieval and not just medieval, throughout all of history, most people considered magic to be real. Even to this day, if you believe in any form of religion or faith or spirituality, at some point you believe that some form of like prayer or belief or like manifestation can change reality. So if manifestation can change reality, if prayers can change reality and will give you favor, so of course in combat and in battle and warfare, everyone tried to manipulate gods, the nature and the universe to win their own personal qualms and quibbles and battles between one another. So in history we see a lot of cases that, for example, Bronze Age forge priests that created bronze weapons used to put spells inside of them, and even to this day, a lot of blacksmithing culture, even after Christianization, kept a lot of ancient traditions going and ancient rituals to that it is a sacred spiritual place that you are connecting to God and the universe to bring something non-existent into existence, and not just creating metal and forging weapons and tools and armor. Even on the weapons and tools themselves, I don't know if you can make it out on this firearm, but I think you can make it out on this firearm. It's not just visual decorations. Oftentimes prayers asked for aid from gods or God himself, especially like Christian age, and Muslims and Christians would often engrave symbols of protection, symbols of strength and power on their weapons and armor. And many armies had their own priests, military priests, even to this day in conflicts, for example, in Russia invading Ukraine. Both Russia and Ukraine have military priests that accompany as moral boosts and to pray for the dead. But not just as a moral boost, many of the ancient wars, and even, like, for example, Romans had their own soldier priests that their mission was to divine God's intentions and find out if they had favor in this battle, to put curses on their enemies, to create charms and weapons that have special magical properties. So even in real history, people try to use magic and spiritual manipulation, being just at the most basic level, putting a cross on your shield. You are asking for God's divine intervention. As a Christian, especially when you're believe that you are fighting off more the demonic forces, you can integrate that as just like a sprinkling on top of your medieval fantasy as a low fantasy setting where, yes, some magic can influence, but as an added property, not directly influencing the way people fight, but encouraging different forms of prayer before battle, different rituals to clean themselves of the sins of slaying another person, and many other rituals that actually existed. But if you want to go high fantasy and be crazy and have characters that can fire lightning from their fingertips or count down meteor strikes or turn into dragons and slay others or summon dragons or summon monsters into the battle, then you actually interfere with the form of warfare that happened in medieval age. And now we have to rethink the strategy, how that would work, how people would try to protect themselves, how it's not one of the biggest problems I have with Game of Thrones is that, oh, dragons exist, then people who have dragons, it's done. They win. Of course, they had crossbows to kill those dragons, but okay, that's another complicated rant. But it's always a warfare of like arms race. It's always an arms race. When our ancestors first went from stone tools to metal, early copper and bronze tools, people started inventing armor and protection that would be hard enough to stop it. And the style of battle, when they invented catapults and cannons, they built thicker walls and thicker protections. It's always an arms race. So if your army has a wizard who can fire a fireball, my army would try to counter it somehow. Maybe we'll find our own wizard, we'll try to create our own magic system protection against it, or our own weapon or our own method of fighting back. Of course, in previous videos I suggested that fireballs can be countered with cannons and fire bombs, but in history, not going back to like early Renaissance and the late stage of Middle Ages where firearms were introduced, even Greeks had the Greek fire that they not only threw with like cannons and with catapults and Molotov cocktails, basically through early form of Molotov cocktails, they also invented weapons like a fire hose that actually shoots fire. So often fantasy stories get presented to be less creative and less technologically viable than actual history. So when we're introduced in people who can cast lightning, who can summon thunderbolts, who can reshape reality through either their prayers asking for gods to intervene or through their own power, we need to rethink how battles would be formed. Why would I, a regular soldier with no magic, stand in line and fight a guy who can literally turn me into smoke? Like, point a finger at me and go alakazam and I'm gone. Why would I fight that? Why would I, even if they force me to fight, I would just, I don't know, use it against me to not to be turned into ash and die on my own terms. So what kind of battles would there be if, for example, both sides had wizards? One side has a wizard that can wipe away the army, that side wins. But what if both sides have wizards? How would they fight? Would they have like wizard duels? Would there be, for example, in the ancient times, when two armies met, they would often choose their best fighters to fight one another rather than risk the whole army to be slaughtered.
Imagine a king who fights his own battles. Wouldn't that be a sight?
So often kings or generals would put themselves or their favorite fighter as a symbol to represent them. And if the deal was made that if my guy beats your guy, we win. Then we don't have to sacrifice our whole army into this battle. Maybe like wizards have individual duels. But that's assuming that one king, a kingdom gets one wizard, like one high mage for each castle. But what if there are lower level mages? What if magic is more common? How would it form and how would it shape the battlefield? I cannot answer because I don't know what type of warfare and what type of magic you would introduce to your world. But always think through that, because often I see creative ideas put into worlds with no creative solutions to the problems. The magic will not affect just the lives of your main characters. It will affect the whole world, how it's structured, how it's social classes. If magic is genetically inherited, it wouldn't go to your, I don't know, every typical magic where it's inherited. It's after, oh, we must hide ourselves, or oh, they're coming after us. Humans without magic will come after us. No, usually people with power and inherited power become the rulers of that society. Yes, maybe someone would try to prevent that, but if, like, I don't know, there is a school of Hogwarts, that Hogwarts would be running the whole country, maybe the whole empire, maybe the whole planet, because they have the concentration of people who can alakazam and wipe you off the earth. So it's actually fun to think about how would this form of magic, how would alchemy affect economics? I don't know. My favorite example, Full Metal Alchemist, has really creative ingenuity in how state alchemists use their power. That fact that it's state alchemists, you need to have state certification to use this type of magic, and they're deployed as automatically generals and higher ranking than, like teenage boys become higher ranking than most professional soldiers because they have access to that magic. And in the battle, they are the ones leading the charge, and often most regular soldiers are nothing more than inconvenience to them. And the battle boils down to most soldiers that's filling up the space, while one or two alchemists fight each other in a duel or throw bodies and bodies against one another. So maybe if you want to keep it fair and keep it balanced, giving your non-magical character things like firearms and gunpowder and such technology, or making magic restricted either naturally or unnaturally by some institution, or having a lot of cost to learn the magic. Is it physical, or it takes a lot of time to learn, or you must sacrifice a lot from yourself? There's many ways to limit the spread and power of magic and balance it out in the world. But if one person can shoot a firebolt from their fingers, that reshapes the whole battlefield. You can just put a whole shield wall around this one guy, shield wall around this guy who can shoot firebolts, and turn him into a human tank that everyone's like, protect the mage with level 1 spells that can bam, 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 with one shot could take out regular soldiers. So think through your world building, think through how introducing something like this would affect the world. And remember, people aren't stupid. People will find a way to counter your own mage, either through their own magic or at least making some technology that can one-shot them out of the picture. So be creative. Think through your ideas. Doop 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 doop. Doopy doo doo, scoopy doo doo, bobbity boo, boobity boo.